Chapter 1. The Contract in the Night. Elias Voss sat hunched over his battered laptop, the blue glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his unshaven face. The clock in the corner blinked 2:47 a.m., a mocking reminder of how little time he had left. His bank account hovered at a pitiful $83.12, and the eviction notice taped to his apartment door gave him exactly 3 days to find a new place, or end up on the streets of New Haven. The city outside buzzed faintly, its neon lights bleeding through the cracked blinds, a kaleidoscope of pink and violet that felt more oppressive than inviting tonight. He scrolled through yet another rental site, fingers trembling from too much cheap coffee. The listings were predictable: overpriced studios in the slums, shared rooms with questionable roommates, or luxury lofts so far out of his reach they might as well have been on another planet. Elias wasn't a dreamer anymore, not since he'd walked away from his job at Nextech 6 months ago. He'd been a programmer there, decently paid, until they asked him to write code for a project that scraped personal data from millions without consent. He'd refused, and they'd fired him. Integrity, it turned out, didn't pay the rent. A notification pinged, pulling him from his spiral of self-pity. It wasn't from the usual sites but a pop-up from a hidden forum he'd stumbled into weeks ago, a digital back alley for odd jobs and shady deals. The message was simple: downtown apartment, low rent, unique amenities, only for the right tenant. Reply now. Beneath it, a link glowed in red. Elias hesitated. The phrasing was weird, almost cryptic, but the words low rent hooked him like bait. He clicked. The listing loaded instantly. A spacious one-bedroom in the heart of New Haven, complete with high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sleek kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The rent? $300 a month. Elias blinked, certain it was a typo. In this city, even a closet-sized rat hole cost triple that. The photos showed a view of the skyline, glittering towers framed by the distant harbor, and a promise of immediate move-in. The catch? The landlord, one Isolde Mero, required an online signature before any viewing. No tours, no negotiations, just a contract ready to sign. His gut churned. It screamed scam, but desperation drowned out the warning. He'd been sleeping on a mattress with springs poking through, eating instant noodles for weeks. This could be his lifeline. He opened the contract link, and a dense wall of text spilled across the screen, 70 pages of legalese. Single-spaced, with terms like tenant obligations and binding covenants buried in jargon. Elias scrolled to the bottom, where a signature box pulsed expectantly. Who reads these things anyway? He thought. It was a lease, not a pact with the devil. He typed his name, Elias J. Voss, and hit submit. A confirmation email arrived seconds later. Welcome. Tenant. Keys en route. Move in by dawn. No address yet. Just a promise. Elias leaned back, a flicker of relief mixing with unease. He'd done it. Maybe luck was finally turning his way. An hour later, a faint whirring broke the silence outside his window. He peeked through the blinds and saw a drone hovering, its sleek black shell glinting under the streetlights. A small compartment opened, dropping a padded envelope onto the fire escape with a soft thud. Inside was a ring of keys, 5 in total, each etched with faint, swirling patterns, and a note: 1427 Meridian Tower. Unit 19C. Enter at your own risk. The last line struck him as odd, but he chalked it up to eccentric landlord humor. He packed his few belongings, a laptop, some clothes, a chipped coffee mug, into a duffel bag and headed out as the first gray streaks of dawn crept over the city. Meridian Tower loomed in the business district, a glass and steel monolith that reflected New Haven's jagged skyline. The lobby was deserted, its marble floors echoing under Elias's sneakers. A security panel accepted one of the keys, and the elevator whisked him to the 19th floor. Unit 19C waited at the end of a dimly lit hall, its door a slab of matte black metal. He fumbled with the keys, trying each until one clicked. The lock turned smoothly, and the door swung inward. The apartment was everything the listing promised, and more. The living room stretched wide, its high ceiling adorned with recessed lights that flickered on automatically. A wall of windows framed the city, the harbor lights twinkling like stars against the fading dawn. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel, and a hallway led to a bedroom with a bathroom that could have doubled as a spa. It smelled faintly of ozone, crisp and sterile, like a place untouched by human hands. Elias dropped his bag, a grin tugging at his lips despite the exhaustion. Too good to be true, he thought, but he'd take it. He spent the morning unpacking, arranging his meager possessions in a space that dwarfed them. The futon looked pathetic against the polished hardwood, and his laptop seemed out of place on the glass desk in the corner. By noon, hunger drove him to order a pizza, another dent in his dwindling funds, but as he waited, he explored further. The bedroom closet caught his eye, a sliding panel that revealed not shelves but a blank wall of cold brushed metal, no handles, no seams, just a smooth surface with a faint hum vibrating through it when he pressed his palm against it. He frowned, running his fingers along the edges. A tiny keypad glowed to life near the bottom, its digits pulsing red. A locked door inside a closet? It didn't make sense. Meridian Tower was modern, not some gothic mansion with secret passages. He tried punching in random codes, 0000, 1234, but the pad buzzed angrily each time, locking him out after the third attempt. Frustrated, he stepped back, staring at it. The hum grew louder, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. The pizza arrived, and Elias let the mystery slide for the moment. He ate on the couch, a luxury compared to his old place, watching the city shift from day to dusk. But as night fell, the hum returned, insistent, pulling his attention back to the closet. He grabbed his laptop and opened the contract again, skimming for anything about hidden doors or security codes. Page after page blurred past, clauses about utilities, noise restrictions, vague references to tenant responsibilities, until something on page 43 caught his eye. Access to restricted areas granted via code 7193. Use at tenant's discretion. His pulse quickened. It wasn't proof of anything sinister. Just a building quirk, right? He returned to the keypad, typed 7193, and held his breath. A soft click echoed, and the metal wall slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cool, damp, carrying a faint scent of earth and something metallic. From below came a sound, not the hum this time, but a whisper, layered and indistinct, like voices overlapping in a language he couldn't grasp. Elias stood frozen at the threshold. Every rational part of him screamed to close the door. Call the landlord. Get out. But the whispers tugged at him. A siren call laced with curiosity and dread. He'd signed the contract without reading it, moved in without questioning. Whatever lay below, he'd brought it on himself. With a shaky breath, he grabbed his phone for light and took the first step down. The shadows swallowing him whole. Chapter 2. The call from below. The staircase spiraled downward, each step a cold slab of stone that seemed older than the gleaming tower above. Elias gripped his phone tighter, its flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, revealing walls of rough-hewn rock etched with faint, spiraling patterns. The air thickened as he descended, damp, earthy, with that metallic tang biting at his nostrils. The whispers grew louder, no longer a vague murmur but a chorus of distinct voices, soft and overlapping, like wind rustling through unseen leaves. His sneakers scuffed against the stone, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet between the whispers. He counted 20 steps before the staircase leveled into a narrow corridor. The beam of light trembled in his hand, illuminating a space that shouldn't exist. Meridian Tower was a modern high-rise, built on steel and glass, not some ancient crypt carved into the earth. Yet here he was, standing on a floor of polished black stone, the walls arching into a ceiling draped with thin, root-like tendrils that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The whispers sharpened, tugging at his ears, and Elias realized they weren't in English, or any language he knew. They were melodic, urgent, a plea or a warning he couldn't decipher. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking in the stillness. It echoed back, mockingly thin. No answer came, but the whispers paused, then surged again, louder, pulling him forward. At the corridor's end, a faint glow flickered, pale blue, like the light of a dying star. His heart thudded against his ribs, every instinct screaming to turn back. But his feet moved anyway. driven by a mix of fear and a gnawing need to understand what he'd stumbled into. The corridor opened into a chamber, vast and circular, its ceiling lost in shadow. The floor shimmered with inlaid patterns, swirls and sharp angles that caught the light and threw it back in fractured hues. Orbs of glowing energy hovered near the walls, each a different shade: blue, violet, amber, green. They pulsed in rhythm with the tendrils above, casting an eerie glow across the space. And there, seated in a loose semicircle along the edges, were 12 figures, women, or something like women, watching him with eyes that gleamed in the dimness. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. They weren't human, that much was clear in an instant. The nearest one stood, her movements fluid and deliberate, like a predator rising from rest. Her skin shimmered faintly, pearlescent, catching the light in waves, and her hair flowed down her back in a cascade of silver that seemed to shift like liquid metal. Her eyes, sharp, golden, unblinking, pinned him in place. She was tall, regal, her presence filling the room despite the silence. "You've come at last," she said, her voice low and resonant, carrying a weight that made Elias's knees weak. The new keeper of the oath. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His brain scrambled to process the scene. The others rose behind her, each distinct, each impossible. One had hair that flickered like living flame, red and gold sparks dancing at the ends. Another bore wings, translucent, veined with silver, that hummed softly as they flexed. A third had skin marked with swirling gray patterns, like storm clouds etched into flesh. They wore simple tunics, each a different cut and color, but their gazes were uniform, intense, expectant, and faintly hostile. "Keeper of the what?" Elias finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Who? What are you?" The silver-haired woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I am Sereth," she said. "We are the guardians of the void, bound to this place by a curse older than your world's memory. And you, Elias Voss, are our new master, or our jailer, depending on your choice." "Master?" He took a step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. No, I'm not anyone's master. I just rented an apartment. This is insane." A ripple of movement passed through the group. The one with fiery hair snorted, crossing her arms. "He's clueless," she said, her tone lighter than Sereth's, almost amused. "I'm Kalia, and trust me, you're in deeper than you think." "New guy. Enough," Sereth snapped, her gaze never leaving Elias. "He signed the contract. He holds the keys. Ignorance changes nothing." "Contract?" Elias's mind raced back to the 70-page document he'd barely skimmed. "You mean the lease? It's just a rental agreement." "It's a binding covenant," Sereth interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "Crafted by the Void Assembly. Enforced by their agents. You've claimed dominion over us and the gate we guard. Did you not read the terms?" "I didn't." He stopped, heat rising to his face. "Nobody reads those things. It was pages of nonsense. I needed a place to live, not whatever this is." A third figure stepped forward, smaller than the others, her wings folding neatly behind her back. Her eyes glowed a soft lavender, and her voice was quiet, almost mournful. "I'm Naira," she said, "and whether you meant to or not, you've tethered yourself to us. To the Void Gate. It's been this way for centuries. New keepers. New chains." Elias's phone slipped in his sweaty grip, the flashlight beam darting wildly across the chamber. "Void Gate? Chains? Look, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not here to chain anyone. I'm just," he faltered, the absurdity of it crashing over him. "I'm just a guy who got fired and needed a cheap apartment." Sereth's lips pressed into a thin line, her golden eyes narrowing. "Then you're a fool, Elias Voss. The woman who gave you this place, Isolde Mero, she serves the assembly. She chooses the desperate, the reckless, those who'll sign without question. And now you're here, bound to us as we are to you." His stomach dropped. Isolde. The name clicked into place, the cold voice on the phone. The drone delivery. The cryptic note. "Enter at your own risk." He'd thought it was a quirky landlord thing, not a literal warning. "You're saying she tricked me?" "She didn't trick you," Kalia said, smirking despite the tension. "You tricked yourself. Should have read the fine print." "Genius, Kalia," Sereth warned, But the fiery-haired woman just shrugged. Sareth turned back to Elias. Her posture rigid. The contract names you keeper. It grants you power over us, our strength, our service, our lives. In return, we must protect you, for you hold the key to the Void Gate. That's the bargain. What key? Elias demanded, his voice rising. What gate? I don't even know what you're talking about. Sareth gestured to the ring of keys dangling from his belt. One of those unlocks more than doors in this tower. It binds the gate, and us, to your will. As for the gate itself, she stepped aside, revealing the center of the chamber. Behind her, the air shimmered, a faint ripple of energy coalescing into a dark, swirling vortex. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across, but it pulsed with a deep, violet-black light that seemed to swallow the glow of the orbs. The whispers emanated from it, louder now, a cacophony of voices from somewhere beyond. Elias stared, his breath hitching. It wasn't just a portal, it felt alive, hungry, pulling at the edges of his senses. That, Sareth said, is the Void Gate, and you, Keeper, are its new warden, whether you like it or not. Elias's legs wobbled, and he sank to the floor, the cold stone biting through his jeans. 12 pairs of alien eyes watched him, some with pity, some with disdain, all with a flicker of something he couldn't name, hope, maybe, or resignation. He'd wanted a fresh start, a roof over his head. Instead, he'd signed up for a nightmare he didn't understand, with 12 impossible beings staring him down in a gateway to nowhere humming in the dark. Chapter 3. The Curse and the Contract. Elias sat on the cold stone floor, his back pressed against the chamber wall, the Void Gate's pulsing hum vibrating through his bones. The 12 guardians loomed over him, their alien features illuminated by the eerie glow of the floating orbs. Sareth's golden eyes bore into him, unrelenting, while Kalia's smirk lingered like she was waiting for him to crack a joke, or just crack. Naira stood apart, her wings trembling faintly, her lavender gaze fixed on the swirling vortex as if it might swallow her whole. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken history and the weight of their words, Keeper of the Oath. Bound to us, the Void Gate. I need answers, Elias said, his voice steadier than he felt. Real ones, not cryptic riddles. What is this place? Who are you, really? And what the hell does that contract have to do with any of it? Sareth's expression didn't soften, but she nodded, a single, sharp motion. Very well, you've stumbled into a legacy older than your city, your world. We are the guardians of the void, 12 souls torn from our homes, bound by a curse to serve the Void Assembly. That gate, she gestured to the vortex, its edges flickering with tendrils of shadow, is a conduit, a bridge between dimensions. It feeds on our essence to stay open, and the Assembly profits from what it offers. Profits? Elias frowned, his programmer's mind latching onto the word. What, like energy? Data? What's on the other side? Power, Naira murmured, her voice barely audible over the gate's hum. Raw, unfiltered power. It flows through the gate, harvested by the Assembly to fuel their dominion, across worlds, across time. We don't know its full purpose. We only know it costs us everything. Kalia stepped forward, her fiery hair sparking as she moved. Think of it like a cosmic generator. New guy, we're the batteries, and the Assembly's been running the show for centuries. They don't care what it does to us, or to keepers like you. Elias's stomach twisted. And Isolde Marrow? She's part of this Assembly? She's their agent, Sareth said, a broker of sorts. She finds the desperate, the broken, people like you, and binds them to the gate through contracts disguised as mundane agreements. You're not the first keeper, Elias Voss. You won't be the last unless you break the cycle. Break it? He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the exhaustion. You mean I can get out of this? Undo it? Kalia laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Not that easy, genius. The contract's ironclad, legally and otherwise. You signed it. It's yours now. Then what's the point of telling me this? Elias snapped, his frustration boiling over. If I'm stuck, why bother explaining? Because you asked, Sareth said coolly, and because you're not like the others. Most keepers revel in the power, command us, exploit us, until the Assembly tires of them and sends someone new. You look like you'd rather run. He couldn't argue with that. The idea of commanding anyone, let alone 12 alien beings, made his skin crawl. He'd walked away from Nextech because he hated being a cog in someone else's machine. Now he was the machine? I don't want power over you, he said. I don't even want to be here. So tell me how to fix it. Sareth exchanged a glance with Naira. Then Kalia. The air shifted, a subtle tension rippling through the group. There's a way, Sareth said at last, but it's not simple. The curse can be broken. The gate sealed. It requires the Keeper's will, and a sacrifice we can't make alone. Sacrifice? Elias's voice rose. What kind of sacrifice? Not your life, Naira said quickly, stepping closer. Not like that. The gate's energy is tied to us. To the Keeper. To seal it, you'd have to wield its power. Channel it through the key you hold. And sever its connection to our worlds. But if it fails, she trailed off, her wings folding tighter against her back. If it fails, Kalia finished, you could rip a hole in reality. Or worse, the assembly catches wind and kills you before you finish. They don't like losing their toys. Elias's hand drifted to the keys at his belt. The metal cold against his fingers. One of them, he didn't know which, was more than a key to a door. It was a weapon, a lock, a lifeline. So I'm dead either way, he muttered. Great, just great. Not necessarily, Sareth said. The assembly doesn't know your intent yet. Izolda delivered you to us. But she doesn't watch every move. We have time, 3 days. Until the day of convergence. A cosmic alignment that amplifies the gate's energy. It's our only chance to seal it. 3 days, Elias echoed, his mind racing. And if I don't? If I just walk away? You can't, Naira said softly. The contract binds you here. Try to leave, and the assembly will hunt you down. They've done it before. He stared at her, then at the gate, its swirling depths pulling at his thoughts. I need to see this contract. All of it. If I'm stuck in this mess, I'm not flying blind. Kalia grinned, hopping onto a stone ledge with a theatrical flourish. Smart move, new guy. Let's dig into the fine print. Might as well know what you've sold your soul for. Sareth led him back upstairs, the guardians trailing behind in a silent procession. The contrast hit him hard as they emerged into the apartment, polished floors and neon city lights clashing with the ancient chamber below. Elias grabbed his laptop, hands shaking as he opened the contract file. The text sprawled across the screen, dense and impenetrable, but Kalia leaned over his shoulder, pointing out key sections with a spark-tipped finger. Here, she said, highlighting a clause. The tenant, henceforth Keeper, assumes dominion over the 12 guardians and the Void Gate, with all rights and responsibilities therein. She scrolled further. Breach of covenant will result in reclamation by the assembly, by any means necessary. There, Sareth said, her voice low. That's your chain. And ours. Elias's eyes skimmed the words, his programmer's logic kicking in despite the panic. It wasn't just legalese, it was layered with intent. Precise and deliberate. Another line caught his eye. The Keeper's key, granted upon signing, holds the gate's essence. Its use is at the tenant's discretion, under penalty of dissolution. Dissolution, he muttered. What does that mean? Death, Naira said flatly. Or erasure. The assembly doesn't leave loose ends. He shoved the laptop away, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. I signed up for an apartment, not a cosmic death pact. Who even writes this stuff? The assembly, Sareth replied, through agents like Izolda. She's human, or was. Once. Now she's their tool, finding keepers to keep the gate alive. She chose you because you were desperate enough to sign without question. Elias laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Yeah, well, she nailed that part. I'm broke, jobless, and apparently stupid enough to fall for it. Kalia patted his shoulder, a spark singeing his sleeve. Don't beat yourself up too bad. You're not the first sucker. I was a tech whiz back home. Built gates like that one for my people. Then the assembly snatched me. Turned me into this. She gestured to her flaming hair. Trust me, we've all got baggage. He looked at her, then at Sareth, whose rigid stance betrayed a flicker of something. Anger. Maybe. Or shame. Naira's wings drooped, her eyes distant. They weren't just guardians, they were prisoners. Same as him. So what now? He asked. We've got 3 days. What's the plan? Sareth straightened, her voice steel. We prepare. You learn what the key can do. What the gate demands. And when the convergence comes, we decide, freedom, or oblivion. Elias nodded, the weight settling on his shoulders. He'd wanted a fresh start. Instead, he'd inherited a curse, 12 alien lives, and a ticking clock. The contract glowed on the screen. A digital shackle he couldn't escape. Not yet. Chapter 4. Facing the gate. The apartment felt smaller now. Its sleek surfaces and neon-lit view a fragile shell over the ancient chamber below. Elias stood at the edge of the hidden staircase, the ring of keys heavy in his hand, their faint etchings catching the light. Sareth's words echoed in his mind. The key holds the gate's essence. He didn't know which one it was, one of 5. Innocuous bits of metal that could unlock a door or unravel reality. Behind him, the 12 guardians waited, their presence a mix of silent anticipation and barely concealed tension. We need to see it again, Elias said, turning to Sareth. The gate. If I'm supposed to do something with it in 3 days, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Sareth's golden eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Follow me, then, and keep your wits about you. The gate doesn't suffer fools. Kalia smirked, nudging him as they descended. Don't worry, new guy. If it eats you, I'll write you a nice epitaph. Here lies Elias. Signed the wrong lease. Very funny, Elias muttered, though her levity steadied him. Naira trailed behind, her wings brushing the walls. A soft hum accompanying each step. The others followed in a loose procession, their footsteps eerily silent on the stone. The chamber opened before them, vast and unchanged, the void gate dominating its center. Up close, it was more menacing than Elias remembered. The vortex swirled faster now, a deep violet black that seemed to pull light into its depths. Tendrils of shadow writhed at its edges, and the whispers, louder, sharper, clawed at his ears. A cacophony of voices from nowhere and everywhere. He felt it in his chest, a pressure that wasn't just sound but something alive, probing, testing him. What is it, exactly? He asked, his voice small against the gate's hum. You said it's a conduit. To where? Sareth stepped beside him, her silver hair glinting in the orb's glow. To countless worlds, ours. Once. It's a fracture in the fabric of existence, stabilized by the assembly's will and our power. It doesn't just connect, it consumes. Our essence keeps it open. A tether they exploit. Exploit how? Elias pressed, his programmer's curiosity cutting through the fear. Naira answered, her voice soft but firm. It draws energy, raw, chaotic, from the dimensions it touches. The assembly channels that into their machines. Their weapons. Their cities. We don't know the full scope. We only feel it draining us. Year after year. Elias stared at the gate, imagining lines of code feeding an endless loop, siphoning power from unseen sources. So you're fuel? More than that, Kalia said, her fiery hair flaring briefly. We're the lock and the key. Without us, it collapses. That's why they cursed us, trapped us here to keep it running. And you, Keeper, are the new overseer. I don't want to oversee anything, Elias said, his frustration bubbling up. You keep saying I'm bound. But what if I just break it? Seal it shut? The chamber fell silent, the guardians exchanging glances. Sareth's jaw tightened. It's possible, she said at last. The gate can be sealed. The curse broken. But it's not a simple lock to turn. Tell me, Elias insisted, clutching the keys tighter. Sareth gestured to the vortex. The gate's energy is tied to us, our lives, our worlds. To seal it, you'd use the Keeper's key to channel that energy back into itself. Collapsing the connection, it requires a ritual, timed to the day of convergence. When the gate's power peaks. 3 days from now. Sounds straightforward, Elias said, though his gut twisted. What's the catch? Naira stepped forward, her wings trembling. The catch is us. If you seal it, the energy binding us here might unravel completely. We could return to our worlds, or we could cease to exist. There's no certainty. Cease to exist? Elias's voice cracked. You mean die? Not die, Naira said, her lavender eyes meeting his. Vanish. Become nothing. The curse anchors us to this reality. Break it, and we might not survive the shift. Kalia crossed her arms, sparks dancing along her fingers. Or we could get lucky and go home. I'd take that bet over staying here another century. But you don't know, Elias said, turning to Sareth. None of you do. And you're asking me to risk it? I'm not asking, Sareth said, her tone icy. I'm telling you what's possible. The choice is yours. Keeper, live as the Assembly's puppet, commanding us until they tire of you. Or take the chance to end it, for us. For you. Elias's head spun. He'd wanted a way out. Not a gamble with 12 lives. And if it works? If you don't vanish? Then we're free, Sareth said. The curse lifts. The gate closes. And the Assembly loses its hold. But there's more. Of course there is, Elias muttered. What else? The gate's collapse could ripple. Naira said. Destabilize this place, your tower. Your city. We've seen it happen before. With other keepers who tried and failed. The energy's unpredictable. Great, Elias said, rubbing his temples. So I either enslave you, get hunted by this Assembly, or blow up New Haven trying to fix it. Perfect options. Kalia laughed. A sharp, genuine sound. Welcome to our world, Elias. It's been a blast so far. Hasn't it? He ignored her, focusing on the keys. One of them, smooth, heavier than the others, felt different. Its etchings deeper, almost warm. This one, he said, holding it up. Is this it? Sareth took it, her fingers brushing his as she examined it. Yes, she said, her voice softening slightly. The Keeper's key. It's attuned to the gate. Forged from its essence. You'll need it for the ritual. How do I use it? Elias asked, taking it back. It pulsed faintly in his palm. A sensation like static crawling up his arm. You'll learn, Sareth said. We'll teach you. But first, you need to feel it, the gate's power. Without that, the key's useless. Feel it? Elias frowned. What, like meditate? Something like that, Kalia said, hopping off her perch. Come on, new guy. Time for a crash course in cosmic vibes. She grabbed his arm, pulling him closer to the gate. The whispers intensified, a chorus of voices pressing against his skull. Close your eyes, she instructed. Breathe, let it in. Elias hesitated, then obeyed. The darkness behind his lids pulsed with the gate's rhythm. A deep, resonant thrum that sank into his chest. He felt it, a tingling warmth spreading from the key, threading through his veins, connecting him to the vortex. It was vast, overwhelming, like standing at the edge of an ocean with no shore. His knees buckled, but Kalia steadied him. Got it? She asked, her voice distant. Yeah, Elias gasped, opening his eyes. The gate loomed larger now. Its pull undeniable. It's alive. It is, Naira said, her wings humming softly. And it knows you now. Sareth stepped closer, her gaze piercing. That's the first step. You're linked to it, through the key, through us. In 3 days, you'll use that link to seal it, or destroy us all. Elias swallowed, the key burning in his hand. He'd faced the gate, felt its hunger, and glimpsed the stakes. 3 days to learn, to decide, to be a keeper or a breaker. The Guardians watched him, their fates hanging on his next move. And for the first time, he wondered if he'd signed more than a lease. Maybe he'd signed their freedom, or their doom. Chapter 5. The Hunter. The apartment's sterile calm shattered at midnight. Elias jolted awake on the couch, the laptop sliding off his chest with a dull thud. The void gate's hum still lingered in his mind, a phantom echo from the chamber below. But it was a new sound that snapped him alert, a low, rhythmic tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He rubbed his eyes, disoriented, the city's neon glow painting the room in streaks of pink and blue. The tapping came again, sharper, deliberate, like nails on glass. He stumbled to his feet, peering through the window. The 19th floor of Meridian Tower offered a dizzying view of New Haven's skyline. But tonight, something blocked it. A figure perched on the narrow ledge outside, tall, lean, cloaked in black, his silhouette stark against the city lights. His eyes glinted, polished onyx catching the neon, and a faint smirk curled his lips. Elias's breath caught. No one could stand out there, not without gear, not at this height. Before he could react, the figure raised a hand, tracing a symbol in the air. The glass shivered, ripples of dark energy spreading from his touch, and the window shattered inward with a sound like breaking ice. Shards rained across the floor as the man stepped inside, his boots crunching on the debris. Elias staggered back, heart pounding, his voice stuck in his throat. Who are you? He managed, fumbling for the keys on the coffee table. The weight of the keeper's key felt useless now, a trinket against this intruder. The man tilted his head, his smirk widening. Name's Dren Varkes, he said, his voice smooth, edged with menace. Isolde sends her regards. Seems you've taken something she values. Elias Voss. I'm here to negotiate its return. The air shifted behind Elias. A rush of movement as the guardians emerged from the staircase. Sereth stepped forward, her silver hair catching the light, her stance rigid with fury. Leave, she commanded, her voice a blade. You have no claim here. Dren laughed, a low, guttural sound. Oh, Sereth, still playing the warrior? I've danced this dance before. Your kind doesn't scare me. He raised a hand, and shadows coiled around his fingers, thick and inky, pulsing with a life of their own. Kalia darted to Elias's side, her fiery hair flaring. Get back, new guy, she hissed, shoving him toward the hallway. This one's trouble. What's he want? Elias whispered, his eyes locked on Dren. The contract, Naira said, her wings humming as she flanked Sereth. You? Probably both. Dren's shadows lashed out, a whip of darkness aimed at Elias. Sereth moved faster, her arm sweeping up, a shimmer of golden light bursting from her palm. The shadow collided with it, dissolving in a hiss of smoke. But Dren didn't flinch. Cute, he said, but I've learned a few tricks since last time. He lunged, faster than Elias could track, and the room erupted. Kalia unleashed a torrent of flame, sparks raining as Dren dodged with unnatural grace. Naira's wings flared, sending a gust of wind that knocked furniture askew, buying Elias a moment to scramble behind the couch. Sereth met Dren head-on, her golden energy clashing with his shadows in a crackle of light and dark. The other guardians joined in, some hurling shards of light, others weaving barriers, but Dren wove through them. Relentless. He's one of them, Sereth shouted over the chaos, blocking a shadow tendril aimed at Elias. A keeper who turned. Isolde's dog now. Elias's mind raced. A keeper like him? He gripped the keys, the keeper's key warm against his palm. If Dren had been in his shoes, what had broken him? Before he could dwell on it, Dren vaulted over Sereth, landing inches from Elias. Up close, his face was gaunt, a scar tracing his jaw, and a faint red glow pulsed beneath his collar, a device embedded in his skin. Hand it over, Dren snarled, shadows coiling around his fist. The keys, the contract, everything, or I'll take it from your corpse. Panic seized Elias, but something clicked. Kalia's lesson. The gate's energy. He closed his eyes, reaching for that tingling warmth he'd felt earlier. It surged up his arm, faint but real, and he thrust his hand forward. A shimmering barrier flared to life, weak and flickering, but enough to deflect Dren's strike. The shadow fist slammed into it, and Dren stumbled back, surprise flashing across his face. Impressive, he said, regaining his footing. First day, and you're already playing hero. Won't save you. Sereth seized the opening, her golden light slamming into Dren's chest. He grunted, crashing into the wall, but rolled to his feet with a grin. You're rusty, Sereth. And you? He pointed at Elias. Isolde's got plans for you. Run all you want, we'll find you. Kalia launched another fireburst, and Naira's wind howled, forcing Dren toward the broken window. He snarled, shadows flaring to shield him, then leapt onto the ledge. 3 days, he called, his voice carrying over the wind. That's all you've got before the convergence. Enjoy it. With a final smirk, he dropped out of sight, vanishing into the night. The room fell silent, save for the rustle of glass underfoot. Elias sank to his knees, the barrier fading as his strength drained. What was that? Dren Varkes, Sereth said, her voice tight with disgust. A keeper who betrayed his guardians. The assembly broke him, turned him into their hunter. That thing in his neck, it's their leash. He was like me? Elias asked, his throat dry. Once, Naira said, her wings folding tight. He signed the contract, same as you, but he chose power over freedom. When his guardians tried to seal the gate, he sold them out. Now he hunts for Isolde. Kalia kicked a shard of glass, sparks trailing from her foot. He's good at it, too. Fast, mean, and knows our tricks. Lucky we scared him off. He'll be back, Sareth said, her gaze fixed on the shattered window. He knows we're planning something. The assembly won't let the gate go without a fight. Elias stared at the keeper's key. Its warmth fading. He said 3 days. Same as you. The Convergence? Yes, Sareth confirmed. The gate's power peaks then. It's our window to seal it, or their chance to tighten the chains. He nodded, adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. Then we need to be ready. If he's what I could become. He trailed off, the thought too grim to finish. You won't, Kalia said, clapping his shoulder. You've got us. Dren didn't. Plus, you're too stubborn to go full villain. Sareth's expression softened, just for a moment. She's right. You felt the gate, used its power. That's more than Dren did before he fell. But you need to learn faster. He won't come alone next time. Teach me, Elias said, standing despite the ache in his legs. The key, the gate, whatever it takes. I'm not letting him, or Isolde, win. Naira stepped closer, her lavender eyes searching his. You mean that? You'll fight for us? I'll fight for me, Elias said, then paused. And yeah, for you. I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm not turning into that guy. A faint smile touched Naira's lips. The first he'd seen from her. Sareth nodded, a flicker of respect in her gaze. Then we start now, she said. Rest is over. The city glittered beyond the broken window, oblivious to the war brewing in its heart. Elias clutched the key. Dren's scarred face burned into his memory. 3 days. He'd signed a lease expecting shelter. Instead, he'd found a battlefield, and a hunter who'd once been him. Chapter 6. A Fragile Alliance. The apartment lay in ruins. A battlefield of shattered glass and scorched walls. Elias stood amidst the wreckage, the keeper's key dangling from his fingers. Its faint warmth a lifeline against the chaos Dren had left behind. The city's neon glow streamed through the gaping window, casting jagged shadows across the guardians as they gathered around him. Sareth's golden eyes burned with resolve. Kalia's fiery hair flickered with restless energy. And Naira's wings hummed softly, her lavender gaze fixed on the floor. The others, 9 more alien figures, stood in a loose circle, their silence heavy with unspoken stakes. We've got 2 days left, Elias said, his voice hoarse but steady. Dren's coming back, and he won't be alone. If we're sealing that gate, we need a plan, now. Sareth nodded, her silver hair catching the light. The Convergence is our only window. The gate's energy will peak, and the key can channel it to collapse the connection. But it's not just Dren we're up against, it's the assembly. They'll sense the disruption, and blow us all to hell, Kalia added, kicking a piece of broken glass. Fun times ahead. Elias ignored her quip, focusing on Sareth. You said I need to learn the key. How? I barely managed that shield against Dren. It's a start, Sareth said. The key links you to the gate's essence, our essence. You felt it, down there. It's raw, chaotic, but you can shape it with focus. We'll teach you to wield it, not just defend. Naira stepped forward, her wings folding tight. But why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why risk it? Sealing the gate could erase us, or this city. Dren's proof of what happens when keepers fail. Why should we trust you? The question hung in the air, sharp and raw. Elias met her gaze, his chest tightening. I don't know if you should. He admitted, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who signed a stupid lease. But I'm not Dren. I won't sell you out to Isolde or anyone. If there's a chance to free you, to free me, I'll take it. Naira's eyes softened, but doubt lingered. A chance isn't a promise. I've seen keepers try before. They all thought they could win. They didn't. Then tell me what went wrong, Elias said, stepping closer. Help me do it right. Kalia grinned, clapping Naira's shoulder. He's got guts. I'll give him that. Come on, Naira. Give the new guy a shot. We're running out of options. Sareth raised a hand, silencing the chatter. Enough. Naira's right to question. Trust must be earned, not assumed. Elias, you want our help? Prove you're worth it. Start with the key. She gestured to the staircase. and the group descended once more into the chamber. The void gate loomed, its vortex swirling faster, the whispers a relentless drone. Elias clutched the key, its warmth spreading up his arm as he approached. "What do I do?" he asked. "Feel it," Sareth said, standing beside him. "Close your eyes. Reach for the gate's energy. Like before, but this time, pull it into the key, shape it." He obeyed, the darkness behind his lids pulsing with the gate's rhythm. The tingling returned, stronger now, a current flowing from the vortex through his veins. The key grew hot, almost burning, and he gritted his teeth, focusing on that connection. It was like wrestling code, chaotic, unruly, but with patterns he could grasp. He imagined a shield again, then pushed further, condensing the energy into a tighter form, a pulse, a spark. A faint glow erupted from the key, a golden thread arcing toward the gate. The vortex shuddered, its whispers faltering for a heartbeat. Elias gasped, eyes snapping open as the glow faded. "Did I?" "You did," Sareth said, a flicker of approval in her tone. "That's the beginning. With practice, you can wield it stronger enough to seal the gate." Naira watched, her wings still. "It's not enough," she said. "He needs more than sparks. The ritual demands precision, our energy. His will, all aligned. If it breaks, it won't." Elias cut in, surprising himself with the certainty. "I'll figure it out. I'm not letting Dren win." Her lavender eyes searched his. Then she nodded, a small, reluctant gesture. "Then I'll help. But I won't die for nothing." "None of us will," Sareth said. "We'll train him, together." The next hours blurred into a crash course of cosmic power. Kalia taught him to sharpen the energy. Her fiery bursts a model for control. Naira showed him how to sense the gate's rhythm, her wings guiding his breathing to match its pulse. Sareth pushed him hardest, demanding focus, precision. Each failure met with a curt, "again." By dawn, Elias could summon a steady glow from the key, a shield that held for seconds before flickering out. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Exhausted, he slumped against the chamber wall. The guardians scattered around him. 2 days, he muttered. "Think it's enough?" "It has to be," Sareth said, her voice softer now. "You're learning faster than I expected. But there's something you need to know, something we found in the contract." Elias straightened, dread pooling in his gut. "What now?" Kalia pulled his laptop from the pile of salvaged gear. Its screen cracked but functional. She opened the contract, scrolling to a buried clause. "Sealing the gate terminates the covenant. But residual energy may destabilize the anchor point. The keeper assumes all risk." "Anchor point?" Elias frowned. "That's here? The tower?" "More than that," Naira said. "The city. New Haven's built on a fault line, a dimensional one. The gate's collapse could crack it open. Earthquakes, rifts, worse. So we're gambling with millions of lives." Elias said, his voice flat. "Not just yours." Sareth met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, that's the truth keepers before you ignored. They thought only of themselves, or us. Will it stop you?" He stared at the gate. Its hum a taunt. Dren's scarred face flashed in his mind. The red glow of that device a warning of what surrender meant. "No," he said at last. "But we need a backup. Something to contain it if it goes wrong." Kalia raised an eyebrow. "Got a magic fix. New guy?" "Not magic," Elias said, his programmer's brain kicking in. "Control. If I can channel the energy right, direct it into the key. Not out. We might limit the fallout. Like a circuit breaker." Sareth considered it, then nodded. "Possible. Risky. But possible. We'll refine it." A sharp buzz interrupted them. Elias's phone. Somehow still alive, a hologram flickered to life. Isolde Marrow's pale face materializing above the screen. Her white eyes gleamed, her smile cold. "Elias," she purred, "I hear you've met Dren. Pity he didn't finish the job. The assembly's watching now, 2 days until the convergence. Seal that gate, and you'll bury yourself with it. Run, and we'll find you. Choose wisely." The hologram winked out, leaving silence. Elias's hands clenched, the key digging into his palm. "She knows," he said. "She suspects." Sareth corrected. "It changes nothing. We fight, or we fall." Naira's wings flared, a rare spark of defiance in her eyes. "Then we fight. Together." Elias looked around, at Sereth's steel resolve, Kalia's reckless grin, Naira's fragile hope, the other's quiet strength, a fragile alliance, forged in desperation, but an alliance nonetheless. 2 days to master the key, outsmart Dren, defy Isolde, and save a city from the mess he'd signed into. The gate pulsed, waiting, and Elias knew there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The Day of Convergence. The air in the chamber crackled with tension as the day of convergence dawned. Elias stood before the void gate, its vortex churning faster, a violent swirl of violet and black that pulsed like a heartbeat on the edge of collapse. The whispers had grown into a roar, a cacophony of voices clawing at his mind, and the floating orbs flared brighter, their colors bleeding into one another. 2 days of training had sharpened his connection to the Keeper's key, its glow now steady in his hand, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed down like a physical force. Sereth stood at his side, her silver hair whipping in the gate's unseen wind, her golden eyes fixed on the vortex. "It's time," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "The convergence is here. The gate's power is at its peak." Kalia paced nearby, her fiery hair sparking with nervous energy. "Let's hope your circuit breaker idea works. New guy, I'd rather not be the one explaining a city-sized crater to the neighbors." Naira hovered at the edge of the circle, her wings humming, her lavender gaze darting between Elias and the gate. "If it fails," she began, but stopped, swallowing the rest. "It won't," Elias said, gripping the key tighter. He didn't feel the confidence he projected, but doubt wouldn't help now. "We've got this. Together." The other 9 guardians formed a ring around the gate, their tunics rippling as the energy swelled. Each carried a small token, crystals, runes, shards of light, symbols of their worlds, their lives, now offered to the ritual. Sereth had explained it the night before. They'd channel their essence into Elias through the key, to overload the gate and sever its ties. If he could control the flow, direct it inward, New Haven might survive the fallout. "Positions," Sereth commanded, and the guardians raised their arms, their voices rising in a chant. It wasn't a language Elias knew, harsh, melodic, layered with centuries of pain, but it resonated with the gate. The vortex pulsing in sync. He stepped forward, the key burning in his hand, and found the recess at the gate's base, a slot carved into the stone, perfectly matched to the key's shape. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at Sereth. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Insert it. We'll guide you." Elias slid the key in, a jolt of energy surging up his arm. The gate roared, its light flaring blindingly bright, and the chant intensified. Threads of color arced from the guardians, gold from Sereth, red from Kalia, silver from Naira, merging into a tapestry of power that flowed into him. His chest tightened, the energy overwhelming, like holding a live wire. He focused, picturing a circuit, channeling the flow into the key, not out. The ground trembled, dust raining from the ceiling. "It's working," Kalia shouted, her voice strained. "Keep it steady." But the air split with a piercing shriek, and the chamber erupted in chaos. A blast of shadow tore through the wall, debris flying as Dren Varkes emerged, flanked by 2 hulking figures, twisted, humanoid shapes that flickered in and out of sight, their forms unstable, dripping with darkness, his scarred face twisted into a grin, the red glow at his neck pulsing. "Too late, Keeper," he called, shadows coiling around his hands. "The assembly says no." "Dren," Sereth snarled, breaking formation to meet him. Her golden light clashed with his shadows, a deafening crack echoing through the chamber. The shadow creatures lunged, one slamming into Kalia, sending her skidding across the stone. Naira darted forward, her wings flaring to shield Elias. But the second creature swiped at her, claws raking her side. She cried out, stumbling, blood glistening on her tunic. "Naira!" Elias shouted, the key wavering in his grip. The energy faltered, the gate's roar growing wilder. "Focus," Sereth yelled, grappling with Dren. "We can hold them." Kalia scrambled up, hurling a fireball at her attacker, while the other guardians reinforced their chant, their voices ragged but unbroken. Elias's hands shook, the key burning hotter, his vision blurring under the strain. The gate's power flooded him, A tidal wave he could barely contain, threatening to spill out and tear everything apart. Dren broke free, shadows lashing at Sereth, and turned to Elias. You can't do it, he taunted, advancing. You're weak, like I was. Give up, and they'll let you live. Elias gritted his teeth, Dren's words striking too close. He'd been weak, running from Nextech, signing the lease, stumbling into this mess, but not now. I'm not you, he growled, summoning the shield technique Kalia had taught him. It flared around the circle, weaker than before, but enough to block Dren's next strike. Naira staggered to her feet, her wings trembling. Elias, she gasped, blood dripping from her side. We're with you. Finish it. She raised her arms, her silver energy surging despite the pain, and pressed her wings against the gate's edge. The connection stabilized, her essence a bridge that steadied the flow. Elias seized it, shouting their names, Sereth, Kalia, Naira, the others, each one anchoring him. The key glowed like a small sun, the energy coiling inward, tightening into a single point. Dren lunged, shadows aimed at Elias's heart, but Sereth tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Now, she roared. Elias twisted the key, his voice joining the chant in a shaky, desperate cry. The gate's light exploded, a blinding wave that swallowed the chamber. The shadow creatures shrieked, dissolving into motes of black, and Dren's scream cut through the chaos. No, before a surge of energy slammed into him. His body disintegrated, shadows unraveling into nothing, the red device at his neck sparking and dying. The vortex imploded, a deafening roar folding into silence. Elias stumbled, the key slipping from his grasp as the light dimmed. The gate was gone, replaced by a cracked, dull archway, its crystals shattered, its power extinguished. Dust settled, the chamber still, the whispers silent at last. He fell to his knees, every muscle screaming, the guardians collapsing around him. Sereth crawled to his side, her silver hair streaked with dirt. Did it, she rasped. Elias looked at the broken arch, then at Naira, slumped but breathing, Kalia grinning weakly through the pain. It's done, he said, his voice raw. It's sealed. The ground trembled once, a faint aftershock, but the tower held. New Haven held. His circuit breaker, crude, desperate, had worked, channeling the collapse inward, sparing the city from the worst. Naira's wings fluttered, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. We're free? Sereth touched the stone, closing her eyes. Yes, she whispered. The curse, it's gone. Kalia laughed, a weak, triumphant sound. Told you he'd pull it off. Stubborn bastard. Elias managed a shaky grin, relief flooding him. The gate was dead, Dren was gone, and they'd survived, barely. But as the guardians gathered, their eyes reflecting hope and weariness, he knew the fight wasn't the end. It was a beginning, one he'd face with them, whatever came next. Chapter 8. Aftermath and Choices. The chamber lay in quiet ruin, a tomb of shattered stone and fading echoes. The void gate's broken arch loomed at its center, a lifeless husk where the vortex once roared. Dust hung in the air, catching the dim glow of the surviving orbs, their light flickering like candles on the verge of extinction. Elias slumped against the wall, his body a map of aches, the keeper's key cold and dull in his hand. The ritual had drained him, physically, mentally, but the silence was a victory louder than any shout. Around him, the 12 guardians stirred, their faces a mix of exhaustion and wonder. Sereth knelt nearby, her silver hair matted with sweat and grime, her golden eyes tracing the arch's cracked edges. Kalia sprawled on her back, her fiery hair dimmed to embers, a weak laugh escaping her lips. Naira sat hunched, clutching her side where the shadow creature's claws had struck, her wings drooping but alive with faint silver light. The others, 9 voices that had chanted through the storm, gathered slowly, their tunics torn, their tokens scattered across the floor. It's over, Elias said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. We did it. Sereth nodded, her hand pressing against the stone as if testing its reality. The curse is gone, she said, a tremor in her words. I feel it, or rather, I don't. The weight, it's lifted. Naira lifted her head, her lavender eyes glistening. Free, she murmured, tasting the word. After all this time, Kalia propped herself up on an elbow, grinning despite the bruises. Told you, Naira. New guy's a keeper, pun intended. Gates toast, Dren's dust, and we're still kicking. Elias managed a faint smile, but his gaze drifted to the arch. The city hadn't crumbled, his crude channeling had worked, containing the gate's collapse, but the tower trembled faintly, a reminder of how close they'd come. What happens now? He asked, looking to Sareth. You're free, but what does that mean? Sareth stood, wincing as she straightened. It means choice, she said, for the first time in centuries. We decide our paths. The gate bound us here. To this world, this prison. Now it's gone, and so is the assembly's hold. Choice, Naira echoed, her wings fluttering. To stay, or go. Go where? Elias asked, his brow furrowing. The gate's dead. How do you get back to your worlds? Kalia sat up fully, brushing dust from her hands. There are other gates. New guy, smaller, hidden. Portals the assembly didn't control. We've heard whispers over the years. Some of us might find them. Head home. Others, she shrugged, might stick around. Earth's not so bad when you're not a cosmic battery. Elias nodded, processing it. He'd assumed they'd vanish the moment the curse broke, back to their worlds or into nothingness. As Naira had feared, but this was messier, more human. What about you? He asked, glancing at Kalia. She smirked, sparks dancing in her hair. Me? I'm curious. Built tech back home. Gates. Machines. Earth's got its own toys, computers. Drones. Might tinker a bit, see what I can break. Naira's wings flared slightly, a spark of life returning. I want to go, she said, her voice firming. My world. There's nothing left. Maybe, but I need to know. I need to see the sky I lost. Elias's chest tightened. He'd fought for their freedom. But the thought of them leaving, of this strange, fragile bond dissolving, stung more than he expected. You'll find it, he said, meeting her gaze. You deserve that. She smiled, small but genuine, and rose unsteadily. With a final nod, she stepped toward the staircase, her wings lifting her slightly off the ground. Thank you, Elias, she whispered, then ascended, her silhouette fading into the shadows. Others followed, their choices unfolding in quiet moments. 3 guardians, tall, with skin like polished obsidian, spoke of a gate rumored in the mountains, departing with clasped hands and murmurs of gratitude. A 4th, her eyes glowing amber, chose to explore New Haven, drawn to its chaos. One by one, they slipped away, some with farewells, others with only a glance, until 5 remained. Sareth, Kalia, and 3 others whose names Elias still fumbled, Liren, Tavra, and Zin. Why stay? He asked, looking to Sareth. Her presence grounded him, a steady anchor in the storm they'd survived. She hesitated, her golden eyes distant. I was a warrior once, she said, led armies, defended a world that's ash now. The gate was my prison, but also my purpose. Without it, she trailed off, then met his gaze. You fought for us, Elias, not as a keeper, but as one of us. I'd see what comes next, here, with you, if you'll have me. His throat tightened, a warmth spreading through him. Of course, he said softly, you're welcome as long as you want. Kalia snorted, breaking the moment. Oh, get a room. You too. I'm staying 'cause I like the coffee. And maybe to keep you out of trouble. New guy, Liren, a wiry figure with neon-threaded hair, chuckled. I'll scout the city. There's energy here, residual. Maybe, I want to understand it. Tavra and Zin, twins with shimmering scales, nodded in unison. We'll stay a while, Tavra said. Learn this place, then decide. Elias looked at them. This patchwork family born from a cosmic nightmare. Guess I've got roommates now, he said, a tired laugh escaping him. Better than being alone. The tower groaned faintly, settling after the ritual's strain. And Elias's thoughts turned to Isolde. She'd vanished after her hologram threat. No sign of her or the assembly since Dren's fall. Think they're gone? He asked Sareth. For now, she said, her voice hard. The gate was their prize here. Without it, they'll lick their wounds, but they'll watch. They always do. He nodded, the weight of that truth settling in. Freedom wasn't safety, not yet. The apartment above was a wreck, shattered windows, charred walls, but it was theirs. A foothold in a world he'd nearly lost. "We'll fix it," he said, more to himself than them. "Start over." Kalia grinned, standing with a groan. "Good. I'm not sleeping in a cave. Let's get out of here. Smells like defeat and bad decisions." They climbed the staircase, the chamber fading behind them. The apartment greeted them with cold air and city light, a blank canvas of ruin and possibility. Elias stepped to the broken window. New Haven sprawling below, oblivious to the war they'd won. He'd signed a lease expecting shelter, found a curse instead, and broken it with 12 strangers who'd become something more. Sareth joined him, her shoulder brushing his. "What now, Elias Voss?" she asked, her tone lighter than he'd ever heard. He glanced at her, then at Kalia rummaging through the kitchen, Liren tracing the walls, Tavra and Zin whispering plans. "Now?" he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We live. Figure out what that means." The neon flickered, a heartbeat of a city still standing. And Elias felt it, a purpose he hadn't known he'd lost. Reborn in the ashes of the Void Gate, they were free, but tethered, by choice. Not chains, and that, he decided, was enough. Chapter 9. The neon lights burn again. 2 weeks had passed since the Void Gate's collapse, and the apartment at 1427 Meridian Tower was no longer a battlefield. Elias leaned against the newly patched window frame, the glass replaced with a cheaper, slightly warped pane that rattled in the wind. The city sprawled below, its neon heartbeat pulsing through New Haven's veins, pink and violet threads weaving through the dusk. The tower had held, scarred but standing, and the faint tremors that followed the ritual had faded into memory, chalked up by the oblivious city to a minor quake. Inside, the space hummed with life, a stark contrast to the sterile shell Elias had first entered. The walls bore fresh paint, courtesy of Kalia's impatient hands, and a few singed brushes, and the furniture, scavenged from thrift shops, clashed in a chaotic mix of styles. A lumpy couch faced a cracked TV, its screen flickering with static as Liren tinkered with the wiring, her neon-threaded hair glowing faintly in the dim light. Tavra and Zin sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a pile of scavenged tech, circuit boards and wires they'd found in the tower's basement, whispering plans in their twin dialect. Elias's duffel bag still sat in the corner, unpacked, a relic of the life he'd left behind. He didn't need much, not anymore. The lease, once a 70-page trap, had vanished from his laptop the morning after the Convergence, replaced by a single line, term indefinite, tenant, Elias Voss. No trace of Isolde Mero, no assembly threats, just silence, and a home he'd fought for. Sareth emerged from the kitchen, a mug of herbal tea in her hands, something she'd brewed from seeds she'd carried for centuries. A taste of a world long gone. Her silver hair gleamed under the overhead lights, and her golden eyes softened as she joined him at the window. "Quiet night," she said, her voice a low melody against the city's hum. "For once," Elias replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No shadow monsters, no cryptic holograms. Almost feels normal." "Normal," she echoed, testing the word. "Is that what you wanted?" He glanced at her, then at the others scattered across the room. Kalia rummaged through the fridge, muttering about Earth's lack of decent spices, while Liren cursed at a sparking wire. Tavra and Zin laughed, their scales shimmering as they traded a joke. "Not exactly," he admitted. "I wanted a roof, a reset, got a cosmic war and a bunch of alien roommates instead. But it's better." Sareth's lips curved, a rare, genuine smile. "Better than solitude?" "Yeah," he said, meeting her gaze. "Way better." The past weeks had been a blur of recovery and rebuilding. Naira had vanished into the night after the ritual, her wings carrying her toward a horizon Elias hoped held her lost sky. The others who'd left sent no word, gone to mountain gates or distant enclaves, chasing whispers of home. Those who stayed had carved a space here, a fragile truce with Earth's chaos. Kalia had taken to hacking his laptop, teaching herself coding languages with a glee that rivaled her old tech days. Liren roamed the city, mapping its energy flows, while Tavra and Zin dreamed of a workshop, their twin minds buzzing with invention. And Sareth, she'd stayed closest, a steady presence as they patched the apartment and their lives. She didn't speak much of her past, but Elias caught glimpses. A warrior's stance when she moved, a far-off look when the city lights mimicked her world's stars. She'd chosen him, not as a keeper, but as a companion, and that choice grounded him more than he'd expected. "Think they'll come back?" he asked, his voice low. "Isolde, the assembly?" Sareth sipped her tea, her eyes narrowing. "Eventually. The gate's gone, but they don't forget. They'll watch, wait for a new play. We'll be ready." He nodded, the keeper's key still tucked in his pocket. "Cold now but a reminder. Good thing I've got a warrior on my side. And a tech fiend," Kalia called, emerging with a soda can she'd liberated from the fridge. "Don't forget me, new guy. I'm the brains here." Liren snorted, a spark flying from her screwdriver. "Keep telling yourself that. I've almost got this TV working, then I'm the genius." Tavra and Zin chimed in, their voices overlapping. "We'll build something better," Tavra said. "A shield, maybe," Zin added, "for next time." Elias laughed, the sound surprising him. It felt good, light, unburdened. "Guess we're a team now," he said. "Cosmic misfits, taking on the universe. Or at least the rent," Kalia quipped, popping the soda tab with a hiss. The night deepened, and they gathered on the rooftop. A tradition born from sleepless hours after the ritual. The air was crisp, the city's neon painting the sky in electric hues. Elias leaned against the railing, Sareth beside him. The others sprawled on blankets with scavenged snacks, chips, soda, a bag of questionable jerky Kalia swore was edible. The stars peeked through the urban glow, faint but there, and Elias wondered if Naira saw them too. Wherever she'd gone. "What's next?" he asked, half to himself, half to Sareth. She tilted her head, silver hair spilling over her shoulder. "We live," she said simply. "Explore this world, your world. I've fought for so long. Elias, I'd like to see what peace feels like." He nodded, the idea settling in. Peace. He'd chased it through code, through escape, only to find it here, in a wrecked apartment with beings from beyond the stars. "Me too," he said. "Maybe I'll even get a job, something legit this time." Kalia laughed, tossing a chip at him. "Good luck with that. You've got cosmic troublemaker written all over you now." "She's right," Sareth said, her tone teasing. "You're stuck with us, trouble or not." Elias caught the chip, grinning. Wouldn't have it any other way. The rooftop chatter faded into a comfortable hum. The city alive below them. Elias felt the key in his pocket, its edges worn from his grip, and a faint pulse brushed his senses. Not the gate. Not anymore, but a memory of it. A whisper beneath the floor. Sareth noticed, her hand brushing his arm. "You feel it too?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just echoes, right?" "Echoes," she agreed, though her eyes held a flicker of caution. Nothing more. He chose to believe her, letting the moment linger. The assembly might lurk, Isolde might scheme, but tonight, they'd won. New Haven glittered, its neon lights burning again. And Elias stood with Sareth, Kalia, Liren, Tavra, and Zin, a family forged in the void. Tethered by choice, he'd signed a lease expecting a cage, found a curse instead, and broke it to build a home. As the stars winked above, he realized it wasn't the apartment that mattered, not the walls or the view. It was them, these impossible allies who'd turned a cosmic trap into a life worth living. The neon glowed, the city sang, and Elias Voss, once a lost coder, stood taller, ready for whatever came next, because this time, he wasn't alone.